I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting on a bench outside the Kroger on Elm Street, the one we used to stop at every Sunday after church when she was little. 2 rolling suitcases flanked her like sentinels, and my granddaughter was asleep across her lap, her small sneakers dangling off the edge of the bench. My daughter's face was turned away, but I could see her shoulders. They were doing that thing they used to do when she was 12 and trying very hard not to cry in front of me. I pulled into the fire lane and left the engine running. She looked up when she heard the car door. For a second, she just stared at me, like she was calculating something, how much to say, how much to hide, how much she could hold before it all came apart. Then her chin went. "Mom." That was all she got out. "I know," I said. "Come on, let's get your sister." I meant the suitcases. She knew that. She picked up my granddaughter without waking her, and I loaded the bags into the trunk, and we drove without talking for the first 10 minutes, because some moments are too full for words, and a mother knows when to be quiet. Her name is Adrienne. She's 34 years old. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, which is the most dangerous combination I know of. She married a man named Fletcher 6 years ago. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who shakes your hand too firmly because he wants you to remember the handshake. His father, a man I will call my former son-in-law's father because that's all he deserves now, ran a mid-sized commercial real estate firm out of Hartford, Connecticut, Apex Property Group. I remember the name because I was supposed to be impressed by it. I was not impressed by it. What I was for 6 years was patient. Adrienne called me on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just come in from the garden. I grow tomatoes every summer, have since 1987, and there's a ritual to watering them in the early morning that I find meditative. And I was still pulling off my gloves when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Her voice was flat in that specific way that means the crying is already done and what's left is just the facts. "He asked me to leave," she said. I set the gloves down very carefully. "Fletcher?" "His father." A pause. "Well, both of them, but it started with his father." I asked her to tell me what happened. She told me. It took about 20 minutes, and when she was done, I stood at my kitchen window looking at my tomato plants, and I said, "Where are you right now?" "The Kroger on Elm." I didn't know where else to go. I picked up my keys. Here is what I knew about my daughter's father-in-law, a man named Garrison, that Adrienne did not know I knew. I knew that 18 months ago, a woman named Patricia, the former controller of Apex Property Group, had filed a wrongful termination complaint with the Connecticut Department of Labor. I knew this because Patricia was the daughter of a woman I had worked with for 11 years at Consolidated Financial Services, where I spent the better part of my career as a senior auditor before I retired at 62. Patricia's mother called me when the whole thing blew up. She was upset, and she needed someone who understood the financial side of what had allegedly happened. I understood it very well. Patricia had discovered during a routine reconciliation that certain project escrow accounts were being drawn down before completion milestones were met, a quiet kind of fraud that's very easy to hide in commercial real estate if you know where to put things, and very easy to find if you know where to look. She raised the issue internally. Within 3 weeks, she was terminated for what Garrison called performance concerns. She hired an attorney. The case was still open. I also knew that Adrienne worked in the accounts receivable department at Apex Property Group. She had taken the job 2 years into the marriage because Fletcher suggested it, and at the time it seemed like a good idea. I had reservations. I kept them to myself, which is one of my less admirable qualities. I keep things to myself for too long. I am working on that. What Garrison did not know about me, what almost no one outside of certain professional circles knew, was that I had spent 31 years as a forensic auditor. My name is Evelyn Cross. I am 63 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom colonial in West Hartford that I paid off in 2019. I drive a sensible Subaru. I wear cardigans. And I once testified as an expert witness in a federal fraud case that resulted in a 12-year sentence for a man who had stolen $47 million from municipal pension funds. Garrison had looked at me at every family dinner and seen a retired woman who made good pie. When I got to the Kroger, I loaded my daughter and my sleeping granddaughter into the car and I drove us home. I made tea. I put my granddaughter, whose name is Macy and who had slept through the entire thing like the remarkably unbothered 5-year-old she is, into the guest room. Then I sat across from Adrian at the kitchen table and I said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out because it sounds small." She talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I took notes on a legal pad. The picture that emerged was this. Garrison had decided, sometime in the past year, that Adrian was a liability. Not because of anything she had done, because of what she might have seen. The accounts receivable work she'd been doing had apparently brought her closer to some of the irregular transactions than Garrison was comfortable with. He hadn't said that, of course. What he had said to Fletcher was that Adrian didn't fit the culture of the family business and that her continuing to work there was creating tension. Fletcher, and I say this as a woman who truly tried to see the best in her son-in-law for 6 years. Fletcher did what Fletcher always did when his father spoke, which was agree. Then the agreement expanded. If she didn't fit the business, maybe she didn't fit the family. He told Fletcher I was the reason the firm was having cash flow problems, Adrian said. She was holding her mug with both hands, something she's done since she was a teenager. He said I'd made errors, that accounts were short. I looked at her over my tea. Were they? No. She said it quietly but without hesitation. I kept copies. I always kept copies. I felt something settle in my chest. Pride, maybe. Or relief. Probably both. Where are they? She reached into her bag and put a manila folder on the table. I opened it. I read for 15 minutes. Adrian sat very still on the other side of the table, watching me the way people watch a doctor reading test results. When I finished, I closed the folder and set it down flat with both hands. "Okay," I said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I know what to do." The first call I made was to my accountant, a man named Roger who has done my taxes for 22 years and who owes me a favor that I have never collected. The favor involved his son and a situation in 2018 that I don't need to detail here. I called Roger and I told him I needed a referral to a forensic accounting firm in Hartford, someone independent with no ties to commercial real estate. He called me back in 40 minutes with 3 names. I chose the second one. The second call was to Patricia's attorney. Her name is Deborah. She's been practicing employment and fraud law in Connecticut for 19 years. And when I introduced myself and explained my connection to the case and what Adrian had brought home in that manila folder, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Cross, how soon can you come in?" I said, "Tomorrow morning." What Adrian's documents showed, in combination with what Patricia's attorney already had, was a pattern. Individual transactions that looked like accounting errors in isolation looked very different when you lined them up over 18 months. Funds moved from escrow before project completions. Reimbursements coded to the wrong line items. A shell vendor, a company called Harwick Consulting LLC, that had received $340,000 in payments for services that did not appear to correspond to any documented work. Harwick Consulting LLC was registered in Delaware. Its registered agent was a law firm. Its sole member, when Deborah's investigator traced it, was Garrison's brother-in-law. I want to be precise about something. I didn't go into this wanting to destroy anyone. I went into it because my daughter had been sitting on a bench outside a grocery store with a sleeping child and 2 suitcases, and the man responsible for that believed he could do it without consequence, because he had looked at me across 14 holiday dinners and seen someone who would not know what to do. He was mistaken. The civil complaint was filed 6 weeks after that kitchen table conversation. It named Apex Property Group, Garrison personally, and Harwick Consulting LLC. The claims included breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent misrepresentation, and civil conspiracy. Patricia was a co-plaintiff. Adrian provided a sworn declaration. I provided an expert declaration on the financial analysis. The morning the complaint was filed, copies were sent to the Hartford Business Journal, the Connecticut Real Estate Commission, and 3 of Apex's largest institutional clients, pension funds and municipal entities, the kind of clients who do not tolerate even the appearance of financial irregularity because they have boards and compliance officers and reputations of their own to protect. I had written those cover letters myself, very politely, very specifically. I did not hear from Garrison directly. I heard from his attorney, who called my daughter's phone because he didn't have mine, and left a message that was professionally worded and personally threatening. I called Deborah. Deborah called his attorney. That conversation, I'm told, was brief and clarifying. What happened over the following months was not dramatic in the way people imagine when they hear the word revenge. There was no single confrontation scene. There was no moment where I stood in a doorway and delivered a speech. Real accountability tends to be quieter and more procedural than that, and honestly, I prefer it that way. I spent 31 years in rooms where the truth came out through spreadsheets, not speeches. Apex Property Group lost 2 of its 3 largest institutional clients within 90 days of the complaint becoming public. The Connecticut Real Estate Commission opened a licensing review. The Hartford Business Journal ran a story. Garrison's attorney reached out again, this time about a settlement. Fletcher, for his part, retained his own attorney and began what would become a lengthy and expensive divorce proceeding. He told his attorney that Adrian had sabotaged his family's business. His attorney apparently advised him that this was not a productive framing. Adrian moved into my guest room with Mossy. I won't say it was easy. 2 adults and a 5-year-old in a 4-bedroom house is its own kind of negotiation, and there were nights when we were both tired and short with each other in the small ways that family can be. But there were also mornings when Mossy came downstairs in her pajamas and sat at my kitchen counter eating cereal and asking me questions about my tomato plants with the absolute seriousness of a person who has just discovered that plants are alive and finds this philosophically significant. Those mornings I wouldn't trade. Adrian got a job. She found it herself. I want to be clear about that. She updated her resume, she did the interviews, she negotiated the offer. It was a senior accounts receivable position at a healthcare network in Farmington. Better title than what she'd had, better salary. She cried a little when she got the offer. Not the sad kind. The settlement with Garrison's firm was finalized 11 months after that morning in my kitchen. I was not a party to it. It was between the plaintiffs and the defendants. But Deborah called me when it was done and used the word substantial, and I could hear in her voice that she meant it. There was a condition of the settlement that prohibited disclosure of the specific terms. I'll respect that here. What I can say is that Patricia was made whole, and then some. What I can say is that Adrian's portion, combined with what the divorce proceedings ultimately produced, meant that she was able to put a down payment on a small house in Newington last spring. A 3-bedroom cape with a yard that she described to me on the phone as perfect for a garden. I told her I'd bring her some tomato seedlings. I've been asked by a few people who know the story whether I feel bad for Fletcher, whether I regret any of it. These are genuine questions, and they deserve a genuine answer. I don't regret any of it. I regret that it was necessary. As for Fletcher, I regret that he became a man who chose his father's approval over his wife and daughter. That's not something I did to him. That's a choice he made himself, quietly, over years, in the small daily increments that eventually add up to who a person is. Garrison was a man who looked at my daughter and decided she was replaceable, who looked at me and decided I was invisible, who looked at an irregularity in an escrow account and decided the woman who noticed it was the problem. He was the kind of man who had been making those calculations for a long time and had simply never encountered the right set of variables. I was 63 years old, retired, growing tomatoes in my garden on a Tuesday morning when my daughter called me from a parking lot. I had 31 years of forensic accounting, a manila folder full of copied documents, a contact list that included a very good attorney, and absolutely nothing else to do. Macy's garden is doing well, by the way. We put in the tomato seedlings in early May. I drove out on a Saturday and we planted them together, the two of us on our knees in the dirt, her very small hands and my very deliberate ones. She asked me how you know when a tomato is ready. I told her you press it gently, and if it gives just a little, it's time. She thought about that for a second. Kind of like knowing when to do something, she said. I looked at her. 5 years old. Her mother's eyes, her grandmother's timing. Exactly like that, I said. I've been thinking about tomatoes again. Not in a sentimental way, just practically, the way a gardener thinks. You put a seed in the ground and you tend it and you wait. The waiting isn't passive. You're watching, adjusting, paying attention. And then one day you press the fruit gently and it gives just a little. And you know, you don't force it before then. You don't panic when it's still green. You trust what you know and you wait for the right moment. That's what I keep coming back to when I think about what happened with Garrison. He made a calculation the morning he decided my daughter was expendable. He looked at Adrian and saw a liability, someone who had gotten too close to the wrong numbers. He looked at me and saw nothing at all. A retired woman with a garden, someone who would grieve quietly and not make trouble. I think he genuinely believed that. And that belief, that comfortable, unconsidered belief, is exactly what undid him. Not me, not the lawsuit. His own refusal to look carefully at what was in front of him. There's something I've learned in 31 years of forensic accounting, and it has nothing to do with numbers. It has to do with character. The people who steal, who manipulate, who quietly dismantle other people's lives to protect their own position. They almost always make the same mistake in the end. They assume the person they're dismissing has nothing left to offer. They stop paying attention. And the moment you stop paying attention is the moment the truth starts catching up to you. Adrian did something I want to name plainly, because I think it matters more than anything I did. She kept copies. In the middle of a marriage that was slowly teaching her she wasn't enough. In a job where her own father-in-law was quietly setting her up to be the scapegoat. She kept copies, not because she was planning to fight back. I don't even think she knew she was doing it strategically. She did it because she knew her own work was good, and some part of her refused to let that truth disappear. That's not calculation. That's integrity. That's a woman who knew what was real even when everyone around her was telling a different story. That kind of quiet moral clarity doesn't get talked about enough. We talk about strength like it's loud, like it looks like confrontation, like a speech in a doorway. But the strength Adrian showed was the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just holds. It keeps the copies. It tells the truth in a sworn declaration. It cries a little when the job offer comes through, and then it goes back to work. As for me, I used what I had. I had knowledge and I had patience and I had a contact list built over 3 decades of doing the work carefully and honestly. None of that fell from the sky. I built it the same way you build anything worth having. 1 year at a time, one decision at a time, choosing to do the right thing even when no one was watching and there was no immediate reward for it. That's the only reason I had anything to offer when my daughter needed me. You can't manufacture credibility in a crisis. You either built it or you didn't. And Massey, 5 years old, planting tomatoes, asking questions about readiness and timing with the instinctive wisdom of someone who has not yet been taught to doubt herself. I look at her and I think, this is what we protect. Not pride, not money, not the satisfaction of watching someone get what they deserve. We protect the conditions that allow a child to grow up in a house where the truth is honored, where a woman's work is respected, where waiting for the right moment is understood as its own form of strength. Garrison is still out there somewhere. He'll be fine, probably, in the diminished way that men like him are fine. What he lost, more than the clients or the licensing review or the settlement, is the story he told himself about who he was. That story is gone, Half. And that, I think, is the only consequence that actually teaches anything. You press the fruit gently. If it gives, it's ready. And if it doesn't, you keep tending and you wait.